course on ecosystems, matter cycling, and energy flow. This video will focus on Objective 1, interpret food webs to identify how matter and energy move between organisms in an ecosystem. Before we talk about food webs and energy transfer, we have to know a few key terms. The first term is producer. Producers are organisms that use energy from the sun to create their own food through photosynthesis. So these are typically going to be plants that we're going to think of. And in the last focus area, we talked all about what photosynthesis is, how these organisms take sunlight, they use that as their energy source, carbon dioxide and water. Those raw materials go through the process of photosynthesis, and what's created is a type of sugar called glucose and oxygen. The extra oxygen is released. That's what you and I breathe in. And then this glucose, the sugar, is used as a food source for both the plant and for other organisms, which leads to our second term, consumer. A consumer is an organism that eats other organisms to obtain energy. So basically anything that cannot go through photosynthesis, so animals, people, we are consumers. We have to eat other organisms to obtain our energy. There's another word that you will probably see on the focus area and in different readings, and that word is heterotrophic. Basically, this is just another way of saying a consumer. It's an organism that gets its energy. Carbon and nitrogen are other very important things we need. We'll talk about in one of the other objectives, but we get those things by consuming or eating other organisms. So here we have a picture of a lion cub eating, and this very tiny turtle eating this very large strawberry. Our consumers, there actually are two types that we need to know about as well. Our primary consumers are organisms that eat producers. So these are basically going to be your plant eaters. You might also hear them called herbivores. So this elephant over here, he's going to be eating plants. Plants are producers. So the elephant is a primary consumer. The other term down here is a secondary consumer, and this is an organism that eats other consumers. So they might be eating other secondary consumers, they might be eating primary consumers. They're not eating plants though. So the lion over here is a secondary consumer. It is eating other animals or other consumers. Meat eaters or carnivores are some other terms you will hear for a secondary consumer. Now we do have a special category of organisms called omnivores. These are organisms that will eat both producers and consumers. They're eating both plants and meat. Raccoons are omnivores. They will eat both types of food. Many people are omnivores who will eat both plants and meat. And then our other category is a decomposer. And these are organisms that eat or break down dead organisms. So they're taking things that have already died and are breaking down the tissue or the cells and all of the parts that make those. Fungi, like these mushrooms over here, and bacteria are very common types of decomposers. There are others, but these are the ones that kind of you'll see very, very often. Let's do just a quick check-in. Take a moment and look through these different organisms. We have bacteria, a lion, a sunflower, and a deer, and see if you can predict which ones are the producers, the primary consumers, the secondary consumer, and the decomposer. Okay, let's see how you did. So again, our bacteria is the decomposer. The lion is the secondary consumer or the carnivore that eats other consumers. The sunflower is a producer. It makes its own food through photosynthesis. And the deer is a primary consumer because it eats producers or plants. So now that we know about the different terms about organisms and what they use to get their energy, we'll talk about how that energy moves through an ecosystem. So the first thing we need to know is a food chain. And a food chain is a single pathway showing how energy and matter are transferred in an ecosystem. So down here we have a plant. This is our producer. It's using the sun. It's trapping the sun's energy in those sugar molecules that it creates. The grasshopper, our primary consumer, eats that plant, uses that sugar in cellular respiration, breaks out the energy, and uses that to live. The next level is the bird, which eats the grasshopper. The bird is our secondary consumer. It's eating the grasshopper, it's getting the energy and the sugar from the grasshopper cells, and is using that to survive. We then have a snake who then will eat the bird. The snake is going to use the energy and the sugar trapped in the bird's cells so that it can live. And then at the top of our food chain is the owl, who's going to eat the snake and then, of course, use all of that energy to survive itself. The direction that these always go is you start here, and the arrow or the energy transfer goes up to the top. Here's a question I want you to think about. What kind of organism needs to be the first on a food chain? What do we need to always start with? If you guessed a producer, you're correct. We have to always start with a producer or a plant or something that goes through photosynthesis because that's where the energy starts. Consumers can't trap sunlight for energy. That energy always has to come back to the sun, and the only organisms that can trap the sun's energy are producers. So we always, always, always have to start with a producer. So if you see a food chain and they try to start with the bird over here, you know that it's not complete because that bird had to get its energy from somewhere else. Now, if we take this up a level, we get to a food web. And a food web is just a collection of pathways or a collection of food chains that show how energy and matter are transferred in a whole ecosystem. So whereas before we just had one path, plant to grasshopper, grasshopper to bird, bird to snake, snake to owl, now we have lots of options. Phytoplankton might be our starting place. You might be eaten by krill or the sand lance or the zooplankton. You might have the gull that gets eaten by the fox. You might have the auklet that gets eaten by the fox. The fox might eat the rat. So there's lots of different pathways and options that could take place here. There is a link on the crash course to a pretty good video. So if you have a chance, go back to the slideshow version of the crash course and click on that link and check out that video. So for predators, we know that predators are organisms that hunt or prey on other organisms for food. There's a special kind of predator, though, called an apex predator. This is an organism that's at the top of the food chain. So a tiger, for example, or a lion would be an apex predator because they don't have any natural predators above them. They are the top. Now, in a lot of situations, humans have become the apex predator because we have technology. Animals that are hunted by humans, if you're thinking about kind of their natural ecosystem, they are the apex predator. But when you introduce humans and technology, we can fill in that apex role. So if you're just thinking of kind of natural ecosystems, the apex predator has no one that's hunting it naturally. When an apex predator dies, its tissues are going to be broken down by something called the decomposers, which we talked about a little bit before. So they're not being hunted and eaten, but their energy, their cells, their the things that make up what they are still get used in the ecosystem just in a slightly different way. So we've been talking a lot about energy. So energy, comes from the sun, gets trapped by the producers, and then transfers all along these different food webs and food chains. So this energy pyramid here kind of shows how that energy transfers. So it starts down here in the producers, and then the energy transfers up. We have organisms that cannot make their own energy. So we as humans cannot make energy. We have to get it from our food. But where does that energy originally come from? From the sun. I mentioned that a few times. The sunlight is the ultimate source of the energy that drives living processes on Earth. So if you remove sunlight, then photosynthesis stops and the energy chain is broken. So if we look at this energy pyramid again, we're going to be starting here in the producers, and they have 100% of the energy available. They can absorb as much sunlight as they need, and they can have all of the food that they are capable of producing. Once those producers are eaten, we go up one level, by the primary producers, only about 10% of the energy that was created or trapped down here, only about 10% of that energy makes it to the primary consumers. So they put some, numbers up here to kind of show you this. So if there's 100,000, units of energy trapped by producers, only about 10,000 of that is available for the primary consumers. Once these guys get eaten by secondary consumers, another 10% can go up to that level. So only about 1,000 units of energy are available here. If you have another level up, again 10%, only 100 units of energy are available. And the apex predator at the top, only 10 units of energy are available that were originally produced down here. So as you go up the energy pyramid, that energy gets lost. How does it get lost? Well, some of it's used when those organisms do their different cellular processes. They can be lost through heat. Over here you can see we've got thermal, which means heat. That energy kind of goes back out into the atmosphere and is no longer available for other organisms to use. Those at the bottom, the producers, have the most energy that is available. Again, the sun is unlimited. Those at the very top have the least amount of energy. The decomposers down here, they're going to be benefiting from all of these other organisms. When they die, they're able to break all of that energy back down. So knowing that, which group would you expect to have the highest population, the most number in an ecosystem? The producers, the primary consumers, the secondary consumers, or the decomposers? So we're going to be looking more at the bottom of the food chain. And actually, the decomposers are going to have pretty strong numbers as well. But if we kind of look at the top part above the decomposers, the next level up, the producers, are going to have the other large group. We have lots of plants, lots of producers that are a food source for many other organisms, and they provide the energy needed for this whole system. So they're going to have the biggest population. So kind of on the other side, which group would you expect to have the lowest population? The secondary consumers, or whoever is up here at the very top. If you only have 10% of the energy going up each level, there's less and less that's available, which means fewer organisms can be supported. So that's why you have just a few bears or a few of these birds of prey versus lots and lots of grasshoppers or rabbits, for example. Another question, if a predator moved into an ecosystem, what would be the likely effect on the population size of its prey? So if you have a greater predator population, your prey population would probably go down. You have more predators hunting, eating more, and so that prey population will likely decrease. That's another reason why you don't have very many of those top predators. Think about, anytime you've ever seen footage of an African savanna, you have lions, you have zebras. You're going to see a whole herd of zebras versus a small pride of just a few lions. That's because the lions are surviving on the zebras, and so if there's only a few zebras and a ton of lions, that's not going to be sustainable. And then just some other terms you might see on the focus area. Basically what I've already covered. Producers are the first feeding level. That's where they start. That's where all that energy starts. Herbivores are the second feeding level, and carnivores are the third feeding level. So if you see any of those types of terms or those feeding levels, that's what that means. All right, in the next video will be Objective 2, so be sure to check that out next.